We're
Okay,
on.
we're on, yeah.
Hello, everybody. This is Tom Lass from philosophyofreedom.com.
Hi, and I'm Angus Hawkins, speaking to you from Sweden, 7 o'clock in the evening over here. So, Tom, what have we been up to this week on philosophy.com? Philosophyofreedom.com even.
Well, I put up a video about a mass formation psychosis theory that somebody came out with. And I started looking at the sudden change that happened in Waldorf education when they brought in anti-racist education. So after looking at that theory, I went over the events that resulted in the dramatic change in Waldorf education toward anti-racist education. And I found that there seemed to be a connection.
Mm-hmm.
So this video was about the connection that I discovered between mass formation hypnosis or psychosis, how that phenomena happens, and then it happens as a result of a series of events that take place.
It was an interesting video. We also discovered something else that we suspected, didn't we? So, like, there's a certain amount. Sometimes comments aren't allowed to stay up. If observant viewers look at that, actually watch that video, they'll see there are X number of comments, but it says there are more. It's there's clearly something going on behind the scenes there. We don't know exactly what.
There is a trick that if you select something like there's top comments, which it's the default setting is top comments, and then there's all comments setting. If you go to the all comments setting, you'll see more comments where the censorship in the top comments is more heavy. So that's a little trick. But yeah, YouTube heavily censors comments.
So today's also been this week has also been interesting for me. I've also spoken to a Waldorf parent and his experiences with a Waldorf school in Texas. That'll be coming out sometime next week once we've finished editing it. Very interesting as a complementary story to the reporting that you did. And then also, I've also spoken to a Swiss artist who happens to live very close to the Goethe in Switzerland, and had a long, interesting conversation with him about like how to communicate the complex ideas in the philosophy of freedom, and he had some really interesting ideas. And also, that's in the editing process, so that'll be coming out at some stage in the future. That's a bit of that's a longer video, so any watchers are going to want to probably do that in installments, or unless they've got a long drive to work, perhaps listen to it then. Although there's quite a bit of visual, especially in the second part of the video. What else have you been up to?
I've been working on a new project of some advanced training in the philosophy of freedom, because it's, we're very serious about this. We take it very seriously. We have dedicated ourselves to a deeper understanding of everything, not just deeper, but it's a life philosophy that encompasses many things. There's a lot of just basic study to grasp the whole of the book. So I'm working up some kind of a process that people can enter into to understand the whole book. And once you understand all the details in the book, you'll also understand the 12 world approach to things, because the cognitive processes described in the philosophy of freedom also explain the cognitive processes behind holding particular worldviews. So,
and that's how we might touch on that today, mightn't we, when we're looking at chapter 2, because it's an essential part of chapter 2 when we look into it, depending a little bit on like how we do time wise.
So, and then also part of that program, See, you can't understand freedom through philosophy. You have to experience it. So part of that will perhaps being keeping a journal or something, to be able to identify within your own experience the impulse of freedom.
Yeah.
We need to become aware of that. We more than likely have these impulses, but we want to become clearly identify it as a clear impulse of freedom. So that'd be part of it. And also people will be involved in some kind of a project-based study, which is kind of what this video is. It's basically doing things to re-express the philosophy of freedom out of yourself, which is another important part.
And I've been reading a Dutch guy. I'm not sure how you pronounce his first name, Mergin perhaps, or Mergin or something like that. Fagad. I've been reading some of his stuff on thinking and the process of thinking, which also at some stage is going to be really interesting to share with our viewers. It's like really a deep dive into what's just like largely a part of chapter 3 especially, but that's on its way. And then I've been digging back into the theory of knowledge implicit in Goethe's worldview as a little bit of a preparation for today as well. It's good to go back and read that stuff. Creating clarity.
We really want to encourage people, if you have a story to tell about Waldorf education, a story that needs to be told about Waldorf education, about anthroposophy. We're kind of in a cultural crisis right now, and we want to protect these institutions that Rudolf Steiner established. So if you have a story to tell, get a hold of us through the contact form on the philosophyofreedom.com website, and we could perhaps interview you and get that story out. Also, if you have an interest in the philosophy of freedom and a story to tell about your experience of the philosophy of freedom, we're very interested in getting those stories through an interview and putting that out there. So if you have something, or if you know somebody, get in touch with us so we can do your story.
Yeah. And then there's already one on the website that you can look at as an example of. It's like a feeling for the style. It's a fairly relaxed style of interview, but still, nevertheless, we get into the weeds to tease out some of the key ideas, which is important so that people can increase their understanding. So, was there anything else we wanted to say before we got on with the meat and bones? No. Okay. So chapter 2, basically, what's going on in chapter 2? There's a lot of Goethe. Steiner references Goethe several times in chapter 2, and the picture that he's presenting is how we are split in our natures. He uses this image of how Goethe. He has this picture of we're two souls. He calls it. It's like right in the beginning quote there. And it's this idea that we're given gifts, coming into life. We're capable of lots of things, but we're also full of desires. We're full of longing for things that we don't have. And this is like an essential part of our nature. And there's nothing strange, scientific, advanced about this. We can all recognize this in our everyday lives. Sometimes we're really content, and sometimes we want more. We want to grow. And Steiner maps this out in the beginning of the philosophy of freedom, and he then uses it to dig into the difference between monism and dualism, as these being reflections of how philosophy tries to tackle this, like this essential human experience that we all know about. And rather than going straight for like Goethe pictures, I've decided to take a dive into William Blake, and I'm going to see if I can get this to share here. I just want to share a bit of artwork and linking it to some of these ideas of split in how we are as human beings, and how it's experienced in the human soul. So I'm just going to have to work out how I share that screen. I think if I note that wasn't it. How am I going to do this? Let me see if I can work out the
It's not so easy.
The technology here is not so easy, is it?
Yeah, I warned you. I'd hoped that you would have practiced this.
Yeah.
The StreamYard recommends you use 2 computers to screen share. But if
so I've got
that
there we go, that works. Okay, let's see. Is that going to? Yep, that's going to work. Okay, so as we said, so like Goethe, Steiner is emphasizing like this split nature of our soul, and more importantly for the book, The Philosophy of Freedom, and the first half of The Philosophy of Freedom is one of these desires is the desire to understand the world. Okay, and what I've done here is so first of all on this, we've just got an example of Blake's artwork here, or it's like a collage of his artwork. But one of the things that if you dig into Blake, even here when people are describing who Blake is, he is what's called a monist. And what is a monist? It's a confusing term that's introduced by Steiner, confusing for people who haven't studied philosophy, of course. And the other word is dualism. So when we see the world, we can a monist would either see it so like everything it's like purely material, and it will, so let's say that is the only reality, and even what we a person might call like spiritual phenomena is basically just material phenomena. So like emergent properties, I believe, is like one of the it's like a common expression for what consciousness is in a materialist worldview. Another form of monism is one that says that there's only spirit. Materialism is or the material world is just an expression of the spirit world. And what Steiner points out is that these two, or even a compromise between the two, is an unsatisfying presentation of how we see the world, because we can't. It's like materialists, material monists. They can't explain consciousness, thinking. How can matter think about itself? And then the monist spiritist can't explain physical phenomena, and so like how it sort of like suddenly magically appears when we open our eyes and disappears when we close our eyes. So they're full of contradictions. And it's the same with dualism, that if we more familiar for people who might have looked at Kant, this idea that the material world and the spiritual world are two separate realms of experience, and they can never find each other. You've got Kant's like Ding an sich out there, but we can only ever experience our subjective knowledge. Did you want to come in on that, Tom?
No, I was trying to get a different setting.
Okay. if we start with this picture by Blake. It's I can see it. Yeah, it's like flicking across my screen. Thank you. So if this is enlightenment at the bottom here, it says enlightenment means taking your full responsibility, means taking full responsibility for your life. And this is something that Blake was like very insistent about. He is. The reason I'm presenting him is because he is a person who claims to have resolved like this this conflict. He thinks that there is a monism, but one that unites our spiritual and material natures. But what happens if we don't? Well, we end up looking like this sorry old guy, Nebuchadnezzar. And what's telling is that with Blake, I can read from the slide there. Nebuchadnezzar tells of a ruler who, through hubris, lost his mind and was reduced to animalistic madness and eating grass as oxen. And this is for Blake. This is a representation of people who are not able to connect the two worlds: the pain and the suffering, the frustration, the uncertainty. A key word that we might come back to later, that reigns if you're not able to unite these two realms of experience that all of us as human beings confront. Again, this is all sort of like behind the scenes of what Steiner's introducing in the beginning of chapter 2, but he does it through Goethe. Okay, we'll start with a direct quote from Blake as well down here. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. And yeah, if you can hear the motto of philosophy of freedom and ethical individualism shouting out at you there, then you certainly got a good hold on it. And this is one of the fruits of when you are able to unite these two. Once you really understand the role of thinking, it's like in how it creates yourself, then you are able to unite these two worlds. And so instead of being enslaved, you are enabled by this inner certainty that arises through understanding that what is you, i.e. what is your thinking. And in this picture, I've seen it interpreted as, it's like God is usually presented as a benign image, but of course he looks a lot more menacing here. And he's got Newton's, I'm not sure what they call those instruments, but it's like a measuring, some type of measuring stick. Do you know what they call those, Tom? What Euson's got in his hand there? Any idea?
No, I don't.
No. I wanted to say calipers, but I'm a little bit unsure. In any case, so the picture here shows a rather menacing version of God. And what's Blake trying to communicate here? He's trying to communicate that if we just if we see reason and law can exercise a tyranny over our thinking, that's not to say it doesn't have value in understanding the world. Of course, it does have value, but it's not everything. And I particularly like this image. It's very striking, especially when I matched it up with this quote from Blake. Any thoughts on what I've done so far, Tom, related to what you know about chapter 2?
No.
No? Okay. I'll carry on. Okay. So this is another image of Blake's, of Urizen, another way of experiencing a person or a mind that is tied down by reason and law, by external authority. And I particularly like this, the power in this image. You've got this man shackled hand and feet, and it's a pretty glum look. It's sad image, and then you begin to, because he's shackled, but then you begin to look at actually his face, and you wonder actually if he might be something somewhere completely else in his mind. You've got these lighter colors up the top there, so there's a strange type of tranquility in this picture also, which I find aesthetically really pleasing, given what I do know about Blake. So I'll just read the quote there that's also like one of Blake's quotes. In your own bosom you bear your heaven and earth. Heaven and earth is another one of those dichotomies, one of those splits, one of those two souls, subject, object, good and evil, heaven and earth, that need to be reconciled in Blake. So in your own bosom you bear your heaven and earth, and all you behold, though it appears without, it is within your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. And Urizen, this guy here, he figures quite prominently in a lot of Blake's artwork as like the oppressive nature of reason. That's again to, how can I this isn't a demonization of reason. It's making sure that reason stays within the realms that it belongs, and doesn't, it becomes like the only way of viewing the world. And I think that's part of what's going on in this picture here from Blake. What do you think about this picture, Tom? Got any thoughts? You like it, dislike it?
Well, he doesn't look very comfortable.
He doesn't. You're focusing more on the shackles. Yeah, that's what I did when I first looked at it as well. Okay, I'll move to the next one. So this is where, I've got a couple of images here that are going to lead us to the idea that, just like in the philosophy of freedom, there is a resolution to this heaven, hell, subject, object, good, evil, internal world, external world. And so how Blake expresses it in one of his better known phrases is, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. And this is probably one of my favorite quotes from Blake in relation to the philosophy of freedom, because in chapter 3, a clear reading of chapter 3 is what begins to dawn on the reader, that we need to clean the doors of perception, and then the world begins to look very different. It's an arduous process, but clearly Blake has achieved something there, and I believe not as radically as Blake, but I believe that's part of what I've already begun to perceive, through working through the philosophy of freedom.
Anne has a question.
Yeah, go for it.
According to Blake, currently our freedom is under attack by those who control this world. We exist here and now. How can one resist? Now, there's the obvious answer is people are resisting like the Freedom Convoy and things. But according to Blake, how would you answer that question?
Oh, blimey. I'm going to. Can I come back to that question? I'm a little bit. It's like in mid flow with that one.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll come back to that question, Anne. So all I'm doing here is indicating that in the philosophy of freedom, here in Blake we find a person, so like saying he's united the inner and the outer world to create this inner freedom. And perhaps that can actually lead me into Anne's question, and I'm sure you're going to be able to add something here, Tom, as well. That when we have inner freedom means both having the courage to act, but also the resources to come up with ideas about what can I do, what do I want to do to somehow change this, the current situation. So when I read a question like how can one resist, Angus, because I'm an individual, I'm in my own unique situation, and I can choose action that's in line with my own morality, with my own capabilities, and my own local situation where I am in the world, and that's going to be part of what defines how I come to an answer of how can one resist, and obviously I look for other people that are trying to resist at the same time. So perhaps a beginning of an answer to Anne's question is recognizing what internally, what are you willing to do? What are some of the options that are around you? That means going out and investigating, like local initiatives or perhaps even other initiatives, and try getting involved with people that are already resisting in a way that goes along with what's acceptable for you, what's morally and ethically okay with your values, and then join in. And if fear is something that's holding you back, just as an example, I'm not saying it is, but if it is, then it's like with your own inner freedom, you begin to understand, begin to question, what's the cause of that fear? Is it necessary for me to have that fear? Do I have to ignore that fear? So there aren't patented answers to this question of how can one resist. Each individual is going to choose his or her own way to do it, and eventually they'll find other people who think in similar ways. And again, this ties into the philosophy of freedom, the website that Tom's created here. This is why I've suddenly got active in this. YouTube suggested a video by Tom, and then I discovered that Tom had started study groups. And because the philosophy of freedom has always been so important to me, I started taking part in those philosophy groups to start joining Tom in his efforts to meet other people who clearly have, they value, they clearly value the philosophy of freedom, and in that way, it's we're forming a community where it's clear to us that we have some form of shared value. What about you, Tom? How can one resist?
Can you see Anne's comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Before I answer Anne's second question, there, what would you say to Anne in response to her question?
Well, I would say my advice would be to become an ethical individualist, and what I mean by that is taking on the path of the philosophy of freedom so you can really empower yourself to operate at your full potential and be guided by your intuitive insights, which will bring you into a place of a, working more toward your full potential so that you can be most effective as far as setting goals and then being empowered to carry those goals out.
It is. It's a strengthening experience. It seems strange when a lot of philosophy that we read is abstract, and it's like it's difficult to understand if it might help. It's like change my actions in everyday life. But that's strongly what personally I experienced through reading The Philosophy of Freedom. That desire to act, that inner certainty, that I am going to do something. Shall I begin to tackle the second question there? Steiner said it's not so much a question; it's actually a statement. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a critical time in history. In this particular format, we're not going to look into or talk in great detail about what Steiner says about the turn of the century and Ahriman and the incarnation of Ahriman and when that's likely to happen. But there is no doubt that some very, very strong forces, Steiner would say very strong spiritual forces, it's like particularly active at this period of time. It's a point of view that I buy into strongly, and I think if we look at what's happening around us, I mean, the perversions of so many things in such a short space of time, medical systems that are no longer interested in practicing medicine, democratic countries that are no longer democratic, advocates of freedom and are like openly censoring. I mean, the world really is upside down in so many senses of the word, and this is what Steiner said we should expect. Tom, do you want to add something there?
No, go on.
No, go on. Okay. So where were we? We were doors of perception. So for me, I wrote it on the blog. The Philosophy of Freedom is a way of cleaning these doors, of cleansing these doors, so that we begin to have a completely fundamentally different take on what our relationship to life is, and that's why I've put this slide up here. And let's say that we'll make this the last slide for this particular presentation. One way that Blake expresses this, it's like once you've attained this state of complete connection, then you're able to utter words like to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity an hour. It becomes a genuine experience of the soul, a complete reuniting with the whole world around you. This isn't just what sounds like poetic words. This is something that becomes, it's like a gradual experience as you delve more deeply into the philosophy of freedom, a genuine experience of what is this amazing thing, is nature that I'm living in. And I can bring that all the way back to Goethe now, because again in chapter 2, what's Goethe saying? He basically he ends the chapter by saying, okay, we feel ourselves separated in our essence, in our spiritual part, from the outside world. But because we are a part of nature, there must be a bit of nature in us that if we could get hold of it in the right way, if we could understand it in the right way, then we could find our way back to like a complete unity or reunification or marriage with nature. And how does that come about? By understanding what thinking really is, not a superficial understanding, but really getting down to the essentials of how it works in our life, how we use it to deepen our understanding of our life, but also what does it tell us about ourselves. Yeah. Oh, in actual fact, I said that was the last slide, but I think I've got, yeah. Obviously, one of the things that when I was reminded of that quote about the doors of perception, of course, there's a lot of art out there. I mean, Blake is just is an amazing example of somebody who's resolved this monism dualism problem that Steiner's talking about in chapter 2. But Blake has obviously clearly affected it's like countless other artists. And if you listen carefully to some of the lyrics of, for example, The Doors, there's some wonderful imagery in there that also speaks to this idea of how do we reunite? How do we connect the spiritual part of ourselves? So like that, what lives in my thinking with the rest of the world. Yeah, I think I'll leave it. I'll leave it there. I need to change my camera here. So that's back to that. Tom, what chapter 2 for you, or how does that link into your take on what's the essence of chapter 2?
Well, I don't really know. I don't really understand Blake too well, and it's kind of I didn't really see the slides before, so I haven't really thought about it.
So it took on the monism dualism, which was introducing that idea of monism and dualism through a different way to the way in which Steiner does it in chapter 2.
Actually, I think you said you're going to get back to. Did you say you were going to get back to this, or did you answer that question?
Yeah, I did. I answered that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you for your presentation. I want to.
Okay, I'll carry on. If you're not, I didn't want it to turn into a monologue, but I'm happy to go on talking a little bit there. So this monism and dualism that he talks heavily about in chapter 2, he also brings in this aspect that also takes a while to get your head around, which is the idea of idealism and realism. And a realist is a person for whom only the sense world is that's where everything happens. That's what life is. That's where I find all my satisfaction. That's the meaning of life, is found in doing things in the world. And idealism, which is another key concept for the whole of the book that he introduces in there is the opposite. It's the idea that the real world is actually the ideas, or the concepts, the ideas that we form about the world. They are more real than reality. I'm going to give an example of, again, so like something for people who've not read about these things that much, which Steiner uses in other contexts. He says to understand the difference between a realist and an idealist. So if imagine a wolf. So it's a hungry wolf, and it only it's so the reality of the wolf is in the material it's made of. Okay, so this is the realist position. So if that wolf spends all of its life eating sheep, well, it should turn into a sheep then, because it's only eating sheep material. So what is it that continues to exist as a wolf despite the fact that it's eating sheep material? And Steiner uses this idea to convey the idea, but there's clearly something beyond the physical that's going there, that's going on there in this process, that's maintaining the form, the instincts, and all the characteristics of the wolf that are clearly beyond the material. But the material can't be denied either. The material is part of it, but it's not the whole. The material isn't the whole, and the ideal isn't the whole. And most of us are neither idealists or realists. We are searching for a truth and something that we can use as a guide that has tangible results because we exist. Absolutely, absolutely. And this is part of what's happening also in the philosophy of freedom. Not just obviously in the philosophy of freedom, but it's very, very very noticeable that Steiner is bouncing us quite literally around different perspectives, different ways of viewing the world, with the pure and simple intention of exercising this thinking faculty to be able to see things from multiple perspectives, to not become purely idealist, to not become purely realist or idealist or spiritist, or have that spiritism, that the truth exists within this sphere, and we can only discover it by moving around in these different realms. But because he doesn't state that explicitly in the book, that this is what he's doing, often I think it's one of the reasons why people give up on the philosophy of freedom, usually after about 20 pages or so, because as a reader, you're used to having one thread or perhaps a couple of threads in a story, you follow it through, and it's a pleasant experience. And that's not what happens in the philosophy of freedom. You're forced to take on lots of different perspectives on the world. And by doing that, it's a bit like doing an assault course. An assault course in the sense that you're having to strain yourselves in different ways to get around this circuit, and each one's going to challenge your muscles in a different way. But if it's a well-built assault course, then what's going to happen is you're going to come out as physically, in the case of an assault course, as a physically more rounded human being, a physically stronger human being. But obviously not if you just do it once. You don't go to the gym once and hope it serves you for the rest of your life. And you don't just run through Steiner's thought process once and expect yourself to have this perfect, the equivalent of a perfect body, a perfect organism for thinking. It's something that's acquired over time by forcing yourself to think in different ways.
Stuart has a question, which Stuart, if you can join us if you click on that link below your comment, you can join us in the studio here, because I'm suspecting that you have an answer to your question. It says, can you clearly distinguish Steiner's spiritual monism from traditional idealism? I would like to hear what you have to say about that, Stuart. So all you have to do is click on that link and you can join us and talk further about your question if you want to. Of course, you may not be prepared to.
Tom, I think he wants you to answer it. Go on. You haven't said much today. Go on, blimey. Normally this is like 50-50. It feels like it's been 95-5 today. So I need some time off. Off you go.
I mean, Stuart's probably in his bathrobe or something. He doesn't want to go on live TV right now. But
Steiner's spiritual monism. What do you think, Tom? What's Steiner's spiritual monism in your thinking?
Well, I'm not really a philosopher. I mean, this is up Stuart's realm. Or actually, do you have some kind of a philosophy degree or something, Angus?
No, I don't know. No, I've just.
You have some kind of degree in something, don't you? It's related to something, right?
Yeah. So they tell me. My original degree was in international business with languages, and then I did a teaching degree. So I'm a language teacher. So linguistics and all that type of thing and the process of communication is something that I studied and think is really interesting. But I've also done a master's in finance as well, which is like obviously a long way away from philosophy.
Actually, if you just click on that link below your comment, Stuart, you'll be online with us. But for now, it's a genuine question to hear your opinions if you have them.
He might be. I've got a feeling he might be on his. It might be that he's on his mobile and can't actually see these comments, so can't click on it. That's a possibility. So I'm not going to let you off. Tom, you're the expert. Spiritual monism. What do you think is going on there?
Oh, no, I'm not really a philosopher.
Okay, I'll have a go. Spiritual monism. It's the idea. Steiner talks more about this in chapter 5 with somebody like Berkeley. It is this idea that a little bit that I hinted at when I was talking about with Blake earlier, and what monism is. It's like from a spiritual point of view. It's this idea. If I put it simplistically, it's like if I shut my eyes now. Because everything only exists in the spirit, the rest of the world isn't there, and it only magically reappears when I open my eyes again. That's an extreme form of spiritual monism that Steiner describes. I believe it's chapter 5 when he's talking about Berkeley. And idealism is. I'm trying to remember what. Obviously, I mean, the first person that comes to mind is someone like Plato, where obviously the real world does exist to an idealist, but it's really only a reflection of it's like an ideal, so like or an archetype. So Plato's image of. Like we're like human beings in a cave and we see shadows dancing on the wall, and we look at the shadows and think they're reality, but really the reality is outside the cave. So that's what traditional idealism is in my world, but it's difficult to reduce it down to a few lines, but those are characteristics of those two streams. So he follows on that question, of which there are several varieties, while at the same time avoiding dualism, of which there are. Okay. What I think what Stuart is asking there is, how do you get dualism is the idea that these two realms, heaven and hell, subject, object, good, evil, material world, spirit world, that these are two separate realms that can never find themselves, or can ding and see. They can never find themselves, so there never is a resolution for that. But this is the dualism is current. If you buy into dualism, what you end up having to conclude is that, okay, I can only ever know my subjective experiences about the world. I can never know the world directly, but that's good enough for doing science. And I'm happy to, even though I'm I might be deluding myself because it's all subjective. I'm still happy to look around in that, to investigate that world of my subjective world, and hope to find, well, obviously there won't be truths, but something that's functional. Another way of understanding it is linking it to Oriental philosophy, and the idea of Maya and illusion, because Maya and illusion is also another one of these ideas that the world that we live in is not the reality. What the senses give us is deception, it's illusion, and we should be striving to turn into winged cherubs or spiritual beings, and just escape back to the spiritual worlds. This was a very prevalent mood, especially in ancient times in India. Steiner talks a lot about the different epochs and that type of thing, and that's one of the things that he's describing here. Oh, we've got, so it seems like we've got some more anthroposophists involved today than philosophy of freedom. Shall I take that one as well, Tom?
Sure.
Yeah, Anne. I'm trying to remain at peace and help by talking to people who are upset. Steiner said that the hierarchies place us in our incarnations for spiritual growth. These are difficult times. Yeah, it's not so much a question. It's moral support for Anne. The hierarchies place us in our incarnations. That sounds, to my ears, that sounds a little bit like unfree. And I would balance that out with, together with the hierarchies, we work to shape a life so that we can balance karma, or we can build on old karma to help develop the world into the world that we want to live in. So it's a less passive. My own stance on that one, and my own take on that one is that I wouldn't use that passive. We are assisted. We work together with the hierarchies because we're part of the so-called 10th hierarchy. So we actually have, as human beings, the capacity to develop free will, which the hierarchies, the lower hierarchies, don't have. It's a genuine question. Steiner isn't talking about the world as is, but the world that presents itself to man. Not sure I understand that, Sven. And that sounds better. Don't know whether she's listening to me or whether she's saying to Patricia. Yeah, it's like a little bit. It's a little bit difficult to follow what's going on in the conversation. Tom, what should we? You know what? Things I've been talking so much, I might as well carry on, and I'll go somewhat personal here as well. In still related to chapter 2. My father, or my stepfather at least, he often talked about how lonely he felt in the universe. The image that he held to be true, or that was central in his mind, is perhaps a better way of describing it, is we are just a speck of dust in the universe. We are totally insignificant. And obviously you can understand from a certain perspective how this perspective could be justified, because it's like physically it's absolutely true. The universe is like infinite. I'm going to be careful with that word, but nearly infinite in size, and it's very easy to feel yourself as small and insignificant. So that's my father's take, who's dead now. But on Douglas Gabriel gave an excellent, really interesting talk, which I could recommend listeners and viewers watch, which is also posted on the philosophyofreedom.com website. Douglas Gabriel gives a wonderful 55-minute talk about the philosophy of freedom from a wonderful perspective, truly wonderful, goes way beyond what I would be capable of describing. But I've seen Douglas talk in other conversations with a guy called John Barneswell, and they're interesting conversations. And Douglas, what he does is he says he's got this turn of phrase, which is something along the lines of, John, you know me, my ego is the size of the universe. That's my problem. And he says it with a smile on his lips. And what's going on here is that, or I think what's going on here is what Douglas is expressing, this idea that it is possible to develop a capacity in yourself where you feel, instead of being a speck of insignificant dust in the universe, you feel as if you are completely within the universe. You are the whole universe. Your ego is as large as the universe, or putting in Blake's words, what was it? The doors of perception. Hold on, I'm going to have to make sure I get it absolutely correct. You will become infinite. Where is it gone? If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, including yourself. I think that's where you can get with the philosophy of freedom, and why I'm so happy to talk about it, to try to communicate some of its subtleties and its inner truths, because it's empowering. Okay, that's it. I'm stopping now. Tom, you've been very silent. You were very talkative last week. You've been. I'm concerned.
Well, I don't know anything about Blake, and so.
No, but you know a lot about chapter 2. I was expecting you to come in a little bit here and fill in some of the ums and ahs.
Well, before I can do that, I have to grasp what you're talking about, and then then go over to the philosophy of freedom. But I don't have the kind of mind that just kind of grasps a lecture like this on the spot and then translate it into other things that I know. So I would need to, prepare more in advance, which we try not to do for this Sunday broadcast.
Yeah,
it's really about what we want to do here is you can submit questions in advance also, and then for us to talk about you can submit them in advance during the week for the Sunday broadcast by posting them, going to philosophyofreedom.com and posting questions on the contact form there, and then bring questions, because eventually we want to just have the Sunday broadcast, which happens every week at this time, to be about a conversation with the Philosophy of Freedom community. We're kind of filling in time now until we get more interest and more questions submitted.
Yeah, and hopefully this is going to come to life more as more people think we're answering their questions, things that are interesting for them.
You can also suggest topics too, and we can, because the Sunday morning broadcast is really about you and what your interests are.
Yeah. Just looking at the last thing that Sven said, pure concepts would be devoid of any perception, therefore they are purely objective. Pure concepts would be devoid. So
devoid of any perceptual content.
Yeah. And this is something that Steiner, when he's talking about pure thinking or sensory thinking, this is sort of part of what he's talking about, isn't it? Yeah. It's difficult to. It's nice when you get questions direct, because you can dig into them, understand what it is the person wants to say or wants to ask. Steiner's monism is about man understanding the whole process of how conceptual causes and perceptual causes of the world interact together inside men's consciousness.
Actually, we should write Esben onto the show. It sounds like she has a lot to say, but it's getting kind of late now.
Yeah. Let's hope that Esben, I don't know whether it's a he or a she, do you? But let's hope she turns up again next week and asks some questions. Yeah. Focus should be put on consciousness itself, not spirit or body. Yeah. Consciousness is where thinking happens. And the Philosophy of Freedom is it's a two-part book. It's one, understanding what thinking is. And then by having a more profound understanding of what thinking is, how it is the essence of our being, then ethical individualism, free moral acts, free moral action becomes a possibility. So putting emphasis on consciousness is the theatre in which a play happens. Absolutely necessary, but an empty theatre is not going to tell us much about the world. If I use that picture, we need to confront the spirit needs to confront the world so that it can reveal its spiritual content, the concepts and the concepts and the ideas that are revealed through thinking, that describe the real world, that make it a whole again, that unite it.
Patricia is suggesting a topic that sounds very good to me. I would love to have more conversation regarding our struggles in the world today as it relates to moral freedom and how we can help on stay on moral ground? That's a great question, a great topic.
You want to make a note of it, and we'll make it a part of where we start off next week, Tom?
Yeah.
Good. That gives us something to dig into.
We have a study. If you want to get to know Angus and myself better, and you want to get to know some other people in the philosophy of freedom community, we have study groups going on Monday and Thursday, Zoom study groups. You can register at the philosophyofreedom.com website. If you click on the link in the banner that says study groups, you'll be able to register for a study group and join us. There's 2 of them tomorrow, Monday.
Oh, Stuart just said something there. We're going to have to come back to that as well. That's there's a big meaty question in there. Okay, but then thinking seems to imply some unavoidable dualism. On the surface, you're absolutely right, Stuart. But if you dig deeper, you can arrive at different answers to that question. Yeah. Okay. That's that. Yeah. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Ben, and Patricia for all your comments and questions, and to keep it alive and relevant as well, so that we don't disappear off into like philosophical la land. It's important. We're trying to provide a service here that people find useful and relevant.
So you ready to wrap it up?
Yeah. So thanks everybody for coming and listening. Tom?
We'll be back next time and same place next Sunday.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.